All right, hello hikers. And in this video, we're going to be covering 3 of the very best strength exercises that a hiker can do to help them on the trail. Now, before we get into the exercises themselves, I want to cover 2 very important things. Number 1, I want to talk about why a hiker should actually consider doing strength training. Because a lot of hikers out there, they don't really think strength training is something that really needs to fit into their week. Because a lot of us think if we want to get better at hiking, we should just go out and hike. We should spend more time on the trail, get some more miles on the legs, and that will sort us out. And this may work for a lot of people out there, and a lot of hikers do see success for this. However, there are a lot of hikers out there as well who do find some things on the trail are a little bit harder than they need to be. And whether they deal with aches and pains, they struggle on steep up hills or descents, they struggle with stability or whatever it may be, there are a lot of hikers out there that no matter how much walking and no matter how much hiking they do, it may not improve these specific things. And strength training itself can be a really nice addition to a hiker's week. And it can have some incredible benefits for the trail as well as your life in general. Now, specifically when we're talking about strength training for hiking, I like to sort of talk about 4 really big benefits that you can get out of this type of training. Number 1, strength training is one of the single best things that a hiker can do to help prevent and reduce pain and injury, both on and off the trail. Now, in the hiking community, pain and injury is such a big thing. So many hikers struggle with things like plantar fasciitis or sprained ankles or shin splints or hiker's knee or hip pain or lower back pain or whatever it may be. It is so common. And structured and specific strength training, if done right, can be one of the single best things you can do to reduce the risk of these things. Now, number 2, strength training can be absolutely amazing at helping improve your capabilities and your performance when going up steep inclines and descents. So if you typically go and get jelly legs when you've got long, extended descents where your legs are wobbling around and you feel really unstable, or when you go up hills, you feel like you've got no oomph, no power, and you just really feel like it's a big struggle, then strength training can make a big difference to that. Now, number 3, strength training is one of the best things you can do to help improve your comfort when carrying a pack. Now, whether you're carrying a day pack all the way up to a super heavy full pack or anything in between, developing the strength and the capabilities of your muscles can make that so much more comfortable. And finally, strength training can actually play a big role in your movement and your hiking speed. Now, hiking speed's a funny subject because a lot of hikers out there who are maybe naturally quicker, they may never really consider this as something they need to improve on. But there are a lot of hikers out there who are a bit naturally slower. And while hiking isn't a race by any means, a lot of people I speak to, they do get a little bit self-conscious about always being at the back of a pack, always wondering and sort of worrying about holding people back. And it's not much fun. And strength training can play a pretty big role in improving your capability to go faster on the trail. So ultimately, when it comes down to it, strength training can be so beneficial for so many hikers out there. And I strongly encourage every single hiker to be doing some of this in their week. Now, the final thing I want to cover before we get into the exact exercises is probably the biggest mistake I often see from hikers who look to apply strength training in their week. Because a lot of hikers I speak to, they're like, yeah, that makes sense. I kind of want to get those benefits. I want to put this into my week and I'm going to do a bit of work. And a lot of hikers will be like, okay, when I'm hiking up a hill, I feel a lot of work in the front of my thighs. So I'm going to do a lot of exercises which really mimic that and help me get stronger. So they'll do lots of squats and maybe step ups and lunges, which are probably the 3 most popular exercises out there for hikers. And those exercises, they are well and good. I love them. They are great. They're really fantastic for hikers. However, they are all working the same area. They are all predominantly working the quadriceps. And when it comes down to hiking, yes, the quadriceps and yes, the front of the thighs, they are doing a large part of work. But there's so many other areas in the body which are doing a lot as well. The backs of the legs are just as important as the front of the legs. The lower legs are just as important as the upper legs. And the biggest mistake I see from hikers is just putting too much focus into one area and neglecting the others. So the intention of the 3 exercises that I'm going to share with you in a moment is even though they are only 3 exercises, they will cover a lot of bases for you. They will make sure if you cover these off in your week that they're actually targeting pretty much the entire legs, and you're getting a really, really good spread of strength, a really good spread of endurance. So ultimately you can get out on the trail and feel comfortable and ready to roll no matter what the trail throws at you. So with that all being said, let's get into the exercises. And I'm going to talk you through and demonstrate the 3 best exercises that I personally believe are so good for hikers. So with that being said, let's get into these exercises. Now, exercise number 1, and probably my absolute favorite exercise for any hiker, is the step down. Now, this exercise is incredibly beneficial and incredibly specific for the demands of hiking. Now, specifically what we're doing here is this exercise will help develop strength and endurance through the front of the thighs, the quadriceps, and a little bit in the glutes. Now, this can be really useful for helping develop stability and resilience through the knees, through the hips, and also a bit of the ankles as well. So it covers a lot of bases that are really relevant for a hiker. Now, on top of that, one of the most common issues that many hikers face on the trail is getting knee pain on steep descents or knee pain on steep steps. Now, the beauty of this exercise is this will help in that situation. And what we're trying to do is load up the body in a really specific way to those particular challenges on the trail and develop tolerance and develop resilience in that situation. So ultimately, if you can train this and develop this and grow this, when you actually get out on the trail, those downhills can be much more comfortable. Now, on top of that, one of the best things about this exercise is it's incredibly versatile, and you can adjust it in very many different ways to be relevant for your own levels of strength and your own capabilities. So in this particular version, I'm using a relatively low step and I'm wearing a pack on my back. Now, what you can do is if you try this and you're like, this is actually a little bit too difficult, what you can do is you can either do it body weight and just do this with a little less weight and purely with the body weight, or you can reduce the step height. And I've had hikers who literally start off with tiny little steps like this and slowly build up as they increase strength and increase confidence, and that works very well. Now, on top of that is if you're doing this and you're like, hey, I can't actually do this because I'm wobbling around all the place, I'm really struggling for my balance, you can hold on to 1 or 2 trekking poles or hold on to a chair or whatever it may be to help with that. So again, you can just choose what you need to do to make this exercise comfortable for you. Now, alternatively, if you give this a go and you're like, this is actually a bit too easy for me, or maybe you've trained this for a few weeks and you want to make it more challenging, then there's 2 options you can use. Number 1, you can basically increase the step height. In this particular version, I'm using, a relatively low step, but you can make this as high as you want and increase the step again and again and again, and that will dramatically increase the difficulty of this movement. Alternatively, you can add a little extra weight. So you could load up that backpack with a bit of extra weight, or you could even hold a couple of dumbbells, whatever you want. So again, you can change this exercise to fit you and your strength and your particular level of fitness. And personally, for my hikers and my mountaineers that I work with, I probably have 99% of people do this exercise in one way, shape, or form or another at some stage in their training. All the way from people who are at the very beginning of their training journey and they're really just starting out with strength training, all the way up to some of my hardcore mountaineers who are tackling some of the biggest mountains in the world. We will use a variation and a version of this to good effect. So that's exercise number 1, the step down. Now, exercise number 2 is the rear foot elevated single leg deadlift, which is a bit of a mouthful, but let me talk through this. Now, the previous exercise we were going through, the step down, predominantly works the front of the thighs, the quadriceps, and a little bit of the glutes. Now, this particular exercise will work the flip side of that, the hamstrings, which are the back of the thighs, and also the glutes a little bit more. Now, this is really important because to get a really well-rounded approach to strength, we want to make sure we're working both the front and the back of the legs. We want to make sure we're not missing important areas, and this exercise will make sure you're covering all your bases. Now, the way to go about this particular exercise, as you can see through this, we basically got 1 foot propped up on a bench or on a counter or something like that, and we got 1 foot on the ground. Now, the key to this exercise as we're going through is this shin angle here. So essentially, as you can see in the exercise, my shin, it's relatively vertical, it's relatively straight, and there's a tiny bend of the knee. And as I go through the movement, that knee and that shin, it doesn't change a huge amount. And essentially what's happening is all the movement is coming out of my hips and I'm pushing my bum back, pushing my hips back, and that's where the movement of the exercise is coming. Now, this is a really, really important part of the exercise because some people, if they don't think about it, they'll do this and they'll end up having a big bend of their knees. And the problem with that is that just ends up turning into a squat or a lunge, which isn't anything wrong with those exercises, but it will change the muscles that are getting worked. So in this one, we want to keep that shin nice and straight, push the bum back and making sure we're really targeting those hamstrings and the glutes. Now, on top of that, we want to make sure the back is nice and flat and keep that all nice and stable. Now, in this particular version, I'm holding a single dumbbell, which I quite like and it works out pretty well. If you do find this is a little bit too difficult for you, you can basically just do this with body weight. Or if you want to make this a bit harder, you can load this up with a bit of extra weight. You can use a heavier dumbbell, you can use a barbell, you can use a pack if you're just training at home. Any of those options work fine. Now, this is one particular variation of this exercise, but some people will do this and they'll be like, I don't really like this. It's a bit awkward in just my body. It's a bit awkward on how I feel. And I kind of want a different option. So I'm going to show you a couple of different alternatives, which will give a very, very similar outcome, but sometimes people may prefer. Now, option number one is a split stance version of this. So in this particular version, we're basically got 1 foot on forward, 1 foot back, and we're both on the floor. So we're not so much using that bench, but we're both on the floor. And essentially in this version, I'm using a backpack, but again, you could use body weight, you could use a dumbbell, you could use a barbell. Now, the benefit of this particular version is that basically it's a little bit more stable. So because we've got both legs on the floor, we don't have to use quite as much stability, quite as much balance. So you can concentrate on just getting the movement right and targeting those muscles. So that's an option if you do feel like you're wobbling around a little bit and really struggling with that other option. Or alternatively, if you're in the situation where you're like, you know what, I actually want to have a bit more balance challenge, then this can be another version where this is a traditional single leg deadlift, where we've basically got 1 foot on the floor, 1 foot actually in the air, and we're doing pretty much the same thing. We're tipping over, loading up those hamstrings and the glutes and working through. And as you can see in this video, I'm kind of wobbling around a little bit, just to stabilize myself. So you'll find. So you can go between those three and sort of say, hey, do I want something really stable, which is the split stance? Do I want something very unstable, which is this single leg deadlift? Or do I want something kind of in the middle, which is the first one I showed you? All will do very, very similar things, and you can choose for personal preference. So exercise number 3, in my favorite exercises for hikers is the humble calf raise. And I know. Hikers are sick of calf raises. And I know you've probably seen these, you've probably been recommended these, you've probably done these to death before. However, these have to be included because calf strength and endurance are crucial for hikers and mountaineers. And specifically, it's really, really, really important. They're helping build stability through the feet, through the ankles, and through the knees. 3 areas which are really important for hikers and a lot of hikers have a lot of trouble with. Now, on top of that, calves play a big role in going up and down steep terrain. So when we're going up steep climbs, the calves are doing a lot. And on top of that is if we're actually trying to hike a little bit quicker, if we're trying to put a bit of pace, the calves end up doing a lot of work. So as much as calf raises are boring, I fully understand it. They are really, really, really important. And I strongly encourage you not to neglect them. Now, this particular version, there's many, many different ways of going about calf raises. This particular version is what's known as a single leg, straight leg calf raise. In this version, we're basically working off a little step and we've got a pack on our back. Now, this exercise, what we're looking at is basically just coming down, slight pause at the bottom, push up to our toes, little pause at the top, and then essentially we're slowly lowering for about 3 or 4 seconds. Now, if you find this particular version a little bit too hard, there's a few different ways you can go about it. Number 1, you could use 2 legs at a time. And so instead of being on 1 leg, do exactly the same with 2 legs. Or alternatively, you could just do this from the floor. So as opposed to be on a step where you go a little bit below, you could just do this from the floor and limit the range of motion. Or alternatively, you could just do this with body weight. It's perfectly fine. So there's a few different options and you can play around with those. So the calf raises should definitely be included. Now, what I'm going to do beyond this, as I said, calf strength is very, very important. If you've been doing these for a while, sometimes it can get a little bit boring. Sometimes it can get a bit repetitive. And unfortunately, calf stuff, there's not too many exciting things you can do. But I'm going to show you 2 slightly different exercises, which are a little bit harder, a little bit more advanced, but they can be a great option for hikers who've been doing calf stuff for a while. Now, option number 1 is what we call a soleus wall raise. So this particular exercise, it's slightly different to the straight leg calf raise. It's slightly working the calves slightly differently to that, but it's in the same field, so I'm going to show it. Now, the beauty of this exercise is essentially we're pairing it with a wall sit. So the beauty of this is not only are we working the calves here, but also working the front of the thighs. So you get a nice bang for your buck exercise where it's covering a couple of different areas. So essentially what we're looking at here, we sit in a wall sit, knees are bent, and we're just pushing up to our toes, little pause, and come down. Now, you'll notice this is pretty challenging, and you can see me shaking along here, and this can be a bit of a challenge. Now, for this particular exercise, it is a little bit hard to load up. Some people will put a pack or a weight across their knees, but realistically, this tends to be, if it gets a little bit easy, then basically you can just use a longer pause at the top and end up pausing for 2 or 3 seconds every single rep, or you can just do more reps. And then the final version, if you're like, yeah, you know what, this is all super easy, I want something that's really challenging. The final version of calf raises is this. And this is a very, very tough one, but can be very effective. So again, this is a little bit different to that straight leg calf raise I showed immediately. It's very, very similar to that soleus wall raise I just showed. And this one's basically pairing it with a split squat. So what we're doing is we're going down to the bottom of a split squat or a bottom of a lunge, holding that position, and then basically just pushing up to our toes and coming down. Now, fair warning, this is an advanced exercise. It's tough. You can see me shaking around and struggling here because it's a tough one. So if you give it a go and it feels really difficult, that's fair enough. But if you do want a challenge, this can be a nice way of, again, just pairing some other exercises with this calf work. And if you want to make this even harder, you can load up with a pack or whatever it may be. Can work out pretty well. So with all that being said, hopefully that just gives you a little bit of an overview of these cool exercises for hikers. For me personally, I will probably use each of these 3 exercises in one variation or another in almost all of my hikers and mountaineers training programs at some stage. And as I said, all of the exercises, they're very adaptable around making it easier or more difficult. And essentially the key to this type of stuff is just finding a version that's going to be right for you. That's going to be a good level of challenge, but is not absolutely going to run you into the ground. And, while to be very, very clear, to get the best results from strength training to help you on the trail, a hiker probably does want to be doing a little bit more than just 3 exercises. If this is the only 3 I could choose, that would probably be it, because they will cover a lot of bases and they can be very, very, very beneficial in a lot of situations. So if you're looking for some exercises, give them a go. Now, on top of that is if you are looking at a hiker and you're like, hey, I want to get strong for the trail. I want to get fit for the trail. I like the idea of this and I just want a little bit of help. If you do need a little bit extra help for your training, I'm going to leave a couple of links below, which will give you some options for free support if you want to come join our community group where we share extra ideas and insights around training for hiking. And I'll also share a link for our online personal training services for hikers, which is online personal training specifically for hikers and mountaineers, and programs that are designed for the personal needs of hikers to help them on their adventures. So if you want to check it out, just go down the comments, check it out below, and you can learn from it there. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching today. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you can give these a go. And any questions, please just let me know.